Good morning. Thank you, Pat and the American Heart Association for having us here at this amazing event. It's the 100th year of the American Heart Association, so congratulations to Center for Health Tech and Innovation, for the Health Tech Advisory Group, and the American Heart Association for this centennial event. Just wanted to start very briefly, tell you about what CINA Research Institute is. We were founded 10 years ago. We were mentoring students over the last 10 years. And that mentorship started to evolve into a research institute. And we're very much founded as a multidisciplinary hub of innovation. We really are innovators. We're made of PhDs, MDs, graduate students, and all the way down to undergrads as well. And we're very much the Switzerland of research. We have students from Texas A&M. We actually brought UT and A&M together under the same roof, rival schools, but not at CINA Research Institute. Our mission is to set the tone for clinical inclusivity by addressing critical gaps in medical research and ensuring diverse populations that reflect real-world population. Houston as a city is the fourth largest city in the nation. Minorities are actually a majority. So our key focus areas is to make sure those underserved populations, underutilized therapies, and inclusivity in trials are being adhered to. We make sure that we utilize multilingual support in our research. You're going to meet my students today as they come up and talk about their research that they've conducted. And we have two poster presentations and an oral abstract. And I'm looking very much forward to my students to talk to you about that. I'll tell you that when we talk about inclusivity and we talk about inclusivity of research, we can all agree that there are underrepresented populations. Those underrepresented populations are typically females, older patients, patients who have higher BMIs over 30, and as well as patients from diverse ethnic backgrounds. The nomenclature that I just want everyone to understand today before we start is something called the Fitzpatrick scale. So if you see, my entire team are wearing bow ties, except for Yulissa. And the bow ties are of the color of the Fitzpatrick scale. You'll also see a number of people in the audience wearing pins, and the pins are also representative of the Fitzpatrick scale. The Fitzpatrick scale goes from a 1 to a 6, 1 being the lightest skin tones, skin being the darkest skin tones. CINA Research Institute is about inclusivity. And I had an aha moment when I was talking to one of the AHA staffs yesterday. And I said, you know, I just realized CINA Research Institute also stands for Clinical Research Inclusivity. And with that, I'll start with having my students come up and they can introduce themselves and talk about the research that they've conducted through CINA Research Institute. Thank you so much for having us at this breakfast this morning. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Yulissa Delgado. I'm one lead researcher here at CINA Research Institute, and I'm here with some of my colleagues as well, and Dr. Asif. So CRI, who are we? So it's CINA Research Institute, and we set the tone for inclusivity. So one of the things that we do most in the trials is try to be inclusive with everyone. There's a lot of claims that that they want to be inclusive, but are they actually being inclusive? That's the main question. Okay. And then we have the Scientific Advisory Board, which is Dr. Dunn, which we have here in the audience. It's the clicker. Hold on. And then we also have Dr. Monroe, and he's the Dean of the Honors Program at the University of Houston. We also have Dr. Bandri, which he is not here today, but we would like to represent him. Okay, and then the CRI principal investigators, which one of them we have here is Dr. Asif, and his brother, Dr. Sajid Ali, which he is in Houston. He could not come with us today. So the CRI students and the leads is Sammy, which we have right here. He's an undergrad at UT Austin. And then we also have Imad. He's a Texas A&M University student. And then myself, I'm a UH graduate with a bachelor's in public health. Okay. We also have 2 researchers on our team, and one of them is here with us today. His name is Marco. And then we also have another student named Jonathan. He's also a doctor. Okay, so who are we? Who is CINA Research Institute? So we're a team of MDs, PhDs, postgraduates, medical students, and undergraduates, and we're working towards one goal, and that's to be inclusive with everyone. So we focus on non-invasive and invasive studies, pharmaceutical trials, medical technology and research, and then we also do research and development. And how Dr. Asif had mentioned earlier, we were founded in 2014 by Dr. Asif and Dr. Sajid as well. And we focus on unrepresented groups in medicine. Okay. So we have different areas of focus. So one of them is the underserved populations. So in this case, it's females, elderlies, and minorities, which is typically what we see. Especially in Texas, this is a big thing, just because the majority is Hispanics. Okay. And then we also focus on pharmaceutical and medtech technology. And as of right now, we're venturing into rare diseases and genetic disorders, but that's not one of the main focuses that we have here. Okay? And we also focus on communities, age groups, and genders. And arguably, one of the most important things that we have here is just the languages that are offered at CRI. So personally, I speak Spanish, and then we also have Arabic, English, Hindi, and Vietnamese. So one of the things that I've noticed the most is whenever we receive proposals, most of them have fine print where it says the participant must know and understand English, which is a huge thing in Texas. But that means you're excluding everyone that speaks Spanish or cannot understand the English. So what CINA Research as a whole does is get those forms and the participants' forms, and we translate them for them. And then for me, I translate for Spanish speakers, and I understand, I format it to where they understand. Okay. Okay, and then with that, I'm Yulissa again, and then we're going to focus on to Sammy now.
Thank you so much for having me here today. I'm so thrilled to represent the CINA Research Institute here at the Health Tech Pavilion. Before I get started, I just want to give thanks to the people that paved my way to be here. Dr. Patrick Dunn in the audience, thank you so much for inviting us out here. Dr. Asif Ali, thank you for giving me the opportunity to come here, represent my research, and just go towards the goal that I love, and that is to make change in the world, to contribute to new evidence-based practices that respect the social determinants of the people around us. That's an important goal and one that we foster here at CINA Research Institute. And lastly, I want to thank my team so much. You guys make it such a pleasure to come into work every morning and do the things that we do. It helps me slow down and realize that, we're just kids. What are we doing here? We're here representing our company, and I couldn't be anywhere else. So beginning, we're going to be talking about my oral abstract session, Figures of Merit for PPG-based monitoring of blood pressure across a diversity of skin tones. Here are my disclosures. I am Sami Faruqi. I am the lead research coordinator for the CINA Research Institute, and this study was done in collaboration with Houston Cardiology Consultants. So we are in the 100th anniversary of the American Heart Association. We're seeing a lot of evolution of thinking. We're seeing geriatrics to pediatrics. We're seeing students and PhDs and attendings. We're also seeing an evolution in wearables. What started out as simple fitness trackers, step counters, has now become bona fide medical grade monitoring devices doing heart rate, oxygen saturation, sleep patterns, and even EKG. But along with this evolution, we are seeing encouragement through FDA approval of these expanding health features. However, the clinical rigor to back up these innovations does not match the marketing claims to sell the product itself. So a little bit of background. Photoplethysmography, or PPG, is the most widely used technology in consumer wearables. Basically, how it works is that you have a light source, and a photodetector. Now for transmissive PPG, these are on opposite sides, and the photon scatter as it goes through the peripheral tissue impacts the amount of photons that reach this photodetector. Now for reflective, the LED source and the photodetector are on the same side, and it detects the optical scatter that bounces back from the tissue. Now, there's an AC component, which is the pulsatile blood, and the DC background absorption. This comparison, the AC-DC ratio, is used to determine a lot of clinical characteristics. Now, there are three most popular wavelengths used in PPG where that light source is composed of. It's green light, which is typically associated with heart rate, and red and infrared, which is usually oxygen saturation. However, there are limitations with this device. We are dealing with light, and melanin absorption of light impacts this AC-DC ratio. We have this graph here that shows that green, red, and infrared do have varying absorption patterns when exposed to melanin. And we have found that oxygen saturation is frequently overestimated in these subjects with darker skin tones. This leads to occult hypoxemia, which leads to delayed medical attention. And this was especially a case. This was a study, a review, a 30-year review on this history of this issue. This has not been a new issue. This has always been prevalent. And this study from physiological measurement looked at this issue of skin pigmentation and pulse oximetry accuracy. Now, this issue was remaining, but tested during the COVID-19 pandemic when we saw 50% of COVID hospitalizations having hypoxemia and an increase of 34% of African American patients compared to white having occult hypoxemia. So this has become a re-emerging issue in our lens. Now, when we're looking at PPG, we're also looking at innovation in the future. And a new innovation that's becoming very popular over time is using PPG for continuous blood pressure monitoring. Now, why is this important? Because continuous blood pressure monitoring is an important clinical indicator, and the PPG on these wearable devices can serve as this modality. It ensures that it is cuffless, continuous, and comfortable. And as you can see from the graph here, this popularity for these kinds of studies has skyrocketed over time. Now, when we look at how PPG blood pressure differs from what we already do with PPG, we see the difference in complexity. For heart rate, it's simply the frequency of the peaks between the PPG waveforms. You simply do that calculation, you can get the heart rate. For oxygen saturation, it's a tad bit more complicated. That AC-DC ratio differs based on red and infrared light, where one absorbs oxygenated hemoglobin more than deoxygenated hemoglobin, and you do a ratio of ratios to compare the two and get an oxygen saturation measurement. That's what we do already with PPG. However, when we go into the future and we try to analyze blood pressure using the same technology, we see it as far more complicated. There are many details of this PPG waveform that we need to take account of, and it requires extensive signal quality. So we're running into an issue. As these consumer wearables are racing to adopt new continuous blood pressure monitoring, they're skipping the clinical rigor to validate their marketing claims. So the present PPG inaccuracies can be compounded when adopting to this new complex process. Therefore, this unsatisfactory clinical testing in diverse cohorts will allow this disparity to continue on further. So we have a key question. Is there an unintended racial bias in optical sensors used in these emerging medical wearables? And if so, what are the fundamental origins? And that is what our study is attempting to answer. So how we did this, we employed a multi-wavelength fingertip-based reflective PPG device, but we also tested a hypothesis. You see, the underside of the fingertip for all people tend to have decreased melanin concentration. So we also attempted to solve this problem by having the PPG be obtained through the underside of the finger. So we do have a hypothesis for this study. The PPG signal will not be impacted by melanin due to decreased concentration on the underside of the finger. So going more into the methods, our inclusion criteria was hypertensive patients and hypotensive patients. And like Dr. Asif mentioned, the Fitzpatrick score was the main metadata that we compounded here, which is a verified, medically and academically verified numerical scale to classify skin tone that has dermatological origins. And as you can see from the diagram, this is what we used in the clinic. We asked the patients what they classified as, and it's the scale from 1 through 6. Now, for data analysis, we have the figures of merit that we're using to interpret the information, the PPG waveform. So as I mentioned, AC-DC can correlate to signal strength. We also have relative peak ratio, or RPR, and signal to noise and distortion ratio, or SINAD. And these equate to waveform consistency and motion and noise signal corruption, respectively. Now, when we're going into the results, I'm going to go into our demographic data a little bit here. Our mean age was 67. 60.3% female, and we had a diverse ethnic distribution, including around 34% Hispanic. Now, this next slide I want to highlight here as well. This is our Fitzpatrick histogram. 59.3% of our study cohort had a Fitzpatrick score of 4 or greater. I'll leave this slide on for a little bit. That's all the results I'm going to give. Later today, during the oral abstract session at room S104A, we will be going into the results of the figures of merit and the interpretation of this study. Thank you again on behalf of the CINA Research Institute for listening. Thank you so much for your time.
All right, and now I will begin. I'll be discussing enhanced external counterpulsation as a novel treatment for heart transplant candidates with ischemic heart failure with reduced ejection fraction. So before we begin, I'm Imad. I'm a clinical research scientist here at CINA Research Institute. And before I get into the case, I'd like to thank Dr. Patrick Dunn for giving us, CRI, the opportunity to be here on the stage. And I'd also like to thank our PI, Dr. Asif Ali, for all the guidance he's given us, for teaching us how to do clinical research and what we have to do to succeed at this level. And the data from this presentation was collected at Houston Cardiology Consultants. So, what is enhanced external counterpulsation? ECP is a non-invasive and cost-effective outpatient therapy. The mechanism by which it works is sequential inflation and deflation of external pressure cuffs that go up to 300 millimeters of mercury with the patient's cardiac cycle. So the cuffs are placed on the calves, the thighs, as well as the hips, and they inflate during the patient's diastole and inflate during the patient's systole. This mimics the effect of an intra-aortic balloon pump by reducing afterload of the patient and increasing the patient's preload. This leads to the benefits, as listed here: improved arterial health, as well as improved cardiac efficiency, coronary collateral formation, exercise tolerance, anginal symptoms, which we'll get into more later, as well as endothelial function. So as for a brief history of ECP, so the MUST-ECP trial is initially what led to the FDA approval for ECP therapy for chronic stable angina in 1999. So the coverage for ECP, the CMS provides national coverage for ECP if the patient has disabling angina, which is defined as a Canadian Cardiovascular Society score of 3 or 4, or inoperability due to excess risk per the opinion of a cardiologist. So you might be wondering, I mentioned the date 1999, and we're here at the Health Innovation Pavilion, and all we see is AI, all these new technologies. So why am I bringing up a really old technology? Well, the thing is, here at CINA Research Institute, we believe that innovation is not only the new technologies, but it's expanding the indications for prior technologies and potentially moving prior technologies further down the line, like ECP as shown here. So for this case, a brief patient history. Once she came to the clinic, she was a 58-year-old Hispanic female. She had uncontrolled type 2 diabetes. And then the points I would like to emphasize on here is her heart failure with reduced ejection fraction of 20%, her chronic stable angina, as well as her severe coronary artery disease, which is highlighted to your right. As you can see, her right coronary artery has a chronic total of obstruction, and her left circumflex has an 80% stenosis. Essentially what that means is the right side of her heart is barely receiving any oxygenated blood, so obviously the tissue's dying. So because of this, she was recommended for heart transplantation by 2 cardiovascular surgeons, but the patient refused and she sought alternative treatment because she didn't want to undergo heart transplant, as it's a very difficult process. So she was discharged from the hospital on guideline-directed medical therapies, where she came to Houston Cardiology Consultants. So at our clinic, she was wheelchair-bound. She had dyspnea on 2 liters of oxygen, as well as a life vest. Her vitals are not the best. She has a very low blood pressure, which is indicative of her low ejection fraction, as well as a high respiratory rate, even on the 2 liters of oxygen and wheelchair-bound. Her evaluation, she appeared much older than her stated age of 58. She had a CCS class of 4, as well as a New York Heart Association heart failure class of 4. For her labs and testing, her EKG showed an anterior infarct with low QRS voltage, and her BNP was 739 picograms per milliliter, which is indicative of the advanced stage of her heart failure. So due to her chronic stable angina, she met Medicare guidelines for ECP and underwent 35 one-hour sessions over 7 weeks. Now, if you want to hear the results, our poster is going to be tomorrow, 10:30 to 11:30 a.m. in Zone 1. It's all the way at the front, so you don't have to walk like anywhere. It's all the way at the front at poster board 1113, and I highly encourage you guys come listen to what we have to say and what we believe are the possible indications for ECP in the future. Thank you so much for listening.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you for all of you to be here, and also especially for Dr. Ali and Dr. Don, the ones that supported us, for all of us. Okay, so this is Jonathan Reyes and Marco Romero, last year medical student and medical graduate, respectively. We're both from Mexico, and it's an honor for us to present our research. Okay, so it's the title is Evaluating the Clinical Reasoning of GPT-4, Grok, Gemini in Different Fields of Cardiology. So we know that those are LLMs, large language models, right? And okay, let's see what our disclosures are. CRI, so we did some collaborations with Harvard, Baim Institute, and Beth Israel. So also thankful to them. But part of the introduction is that LLMs are now increased their use in medical practice, right? But we haven't seen yet a study, especially comparing the different types of LLMs that there are in the market. We know that they may even support clinical practice, but we don't know yet to what actually to the capabilities, and especially for the standardization, we need to compare all of them. It's like, okay, we have new drugs, right? Which one are you going to use as a cardiologist? You need to know which one is better, which one is the best. And okay, so that's what our question was, especially the aim was to assess and evaluate the clinical reasoning of the LLMs, especially in different fields of cardiology, not only general cardiology or preventative cardiology, but also the interventional part, interventional cardiologist, electrophysiologist, even adult congenital heart disease, and the different parts of the science. Okay, so Marco is going to tell the methodology that we used.
Okay, and so this was the way we actually performed the study was a collaboration. It was a international multi-center collaboration where we took 12 cases. We extrapolated 12 cases from the AHA circulation journals, and we focused on 6 different areas of cardiology. So general cardiology, interventional cardiology, cardiac imaging, electrophysiology, heart failure, and congenital heart disease. And from each area of cardiology, we extracted 2 cases. And each of these cases was then provided to the large language model. So we provided the case, and we followed up with a series of questions to the large language model, being what are the diagnostic steps? What is the most likely diagnosis? What is the differential diagnosis? And then following with what is the most appropriate management? So here we really are evaluating the clinical reasoning. Okay, so from the diagnostic to the actual management of these cardiology cases. Following these responses, they were systematically evaluated using a digital rubric, which I will be showing in a couple of slides. And a very important caveat, as you know, when cases are published to the Circulation Journal, they do provide the management and the diagnosis, or diagnosis and management. In this case, we made sure not to provide that, so it's just the clinical case. Okay, and so as I mentioned, this is an international collaboration. We had 12 cardiologists from around the world participate in this study. And each cardiologist was then to evaluate the responses of the large language models based on their own clinical expertise or focus of cardiology. Oh, and very important to mention is that these cardiologists were provided the management and the diagnostic plans provided from the original circulation cases. And then we used One-Way and NOVA to analyze the actual data. Okay, so here we have the list of evaluators. We were very fortunate and very thankful to have such amazing cardiologists actually participating in this study. So we have researchers from, or cardiologists from Houston, from from Massachusetts, from the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, as well as cardiologists from Mexico, Argentina, Spain, Germany. Okay, and so here we actually have the prompt that we used. Essentially, it's the 4 questions that I provided previously. And this is the rubric that the cardiologist actually used to evaluate. So the questions, as I repeat, are what are the diagnostic steps? What is the most likely diagnosis? And also, what is the differential diagnosis? And finally, what is the appropriate management? And based on the responses, they would be graded from 0, typically from 0 to 3. In the case of the 3rd question, from 0 to 4. So of course, this is subjective to the cardiologist. But the data that we actually received from this test, again, as I mentioned, we did use ANOVA, so one-way ANOVA. And following the certain pattern of my colleagues, we will be going over it at our oral presentation later today at 3:15 in Zone 3. So very excited to be able to speak about the results that we achieved from this study, as well as, this is a very interesting topic with very ethical, legal considerations that we'd love to hear your guys' opinions on. Thank you.
Just wanted to end and conclude this talk by also thanking Pat Dunn for his mentorship with these young students who really represent the future of medicine. I think we can all agree with that. What bright minds. We have undergrads who were the first time to present at the Center for Health Tech and Innovation, so we really appreciate the opportunities for my interns to shine in this light and for your attention. I'll end with this one challenge about clinical research inclusivity. I'm on the Health Tech Advisory Group, and between my colleagues, we'd like to just end with this one note. It's amazing that when we look at wearable devices and we look at where we're going with AI and all the complexities with ethical considerations, with inherent biases that are already embedded within the system, and how AI just fosters that. In wearable devices, if you're creating a consumer product and you're going to sell to a diversity of Fitzpatrick scales, then we need to set the bar to say, if you're going to sell to people who are going to use your device, then you need to include them in your studies. And it needs to be all 6 Fitzpatrick scale, not just a few. Clinical research inclusivity. I'll end with this one amazing fact that happened in 5 companies that we've run through their medtech. We do a lot in medtech devices and inclusivity in diverse populations. But I want to point out one thing that just shocked me, and it should shock you. There's inclusion criteria and there's exclusion criteria. You want to know the common theme in the exclusion criteria for clinical research in wearable devices? If you cannot speak English. You exclude, I've had 5 companies in the exclusion criteria. But it makes sense, because if we look back at the Tuskegee study, we want to give empowerment to the patient. But if your CRO and the people running your organization cannot translate into anything other than English, and the exclusion criteria says you cannot bring patients in who don't speak the language from the inclusion criteria, then we're doing a lot of harm, guys. In Houston, minorities are a majority. A third of Houston is Hispanic. So now we just excluded every patient, Hispanic patient, who cannot translate. So this young lady, Yulissa, offered to translate, and all 5 companies adopted their exclusion criteria for CRI. They made provisions because they said we need to be inclusive and not exclusive. Siena Research Institute, clinical research, inclusivity. Love to talk to the industry to really make sure that we're addressing the patient populations that we're actually selling to. Thank you so much. And for my and for my wonderful interns. Thank you.